On television they were closest buddies, but in real life they were much less. When one actress surreptitiously attempted to get wealthy without the others, the Facts of Life was preparing for their big TV comeback. They didn't talk for months because of the ugliness of the betrayal. Even Norman Lear, the TV great, was unable to mend it before he passed away. The last person anybody anticipated is the one who surprised fans by destroying their friendship forever. NBC was having serious problems in 1979. It had the lowest ratings of the three main TV networks. Little House on the Prairie was the only one of its shows that was performing well. The others, notably the huge failure Supertrain, were failures. It failed miserably in its attempt to be a gorgeous love boat on rails. NBC had nothing to show for the millions of dollars it had invested. It was a desperate network. Different Strokes was one program that wasn't a complete bust. People like it mainly because of Gary Coleman, even if it wasn't a huge hit. Fred Silverman, the then head of NBC, understood that they needed to maximize what was even marginally effective. He was attempting to preserve NBC after having previously contributed to the success of CBS and ABC. He decided to take a chance. The Facts of Life, a spin-off from Different Strokes, debuted on NBC in the summer of 1979. At first, hardly no one watched it. It came in at number 74, out of 79 shows that summer. It appeared to be yet another failure. However, in the second season, everything was different. The show took off after a few significant format adjustments. The Facts of Life was NBC's top show by the third season. Charlotte Rae is largely responsible for that accomplishment. On Different Strokes, she portrayed Edna Garrett, the housekeeper. Rae was more than simply a performer. She was referred to be a character actor because of her ability to portray powerful, distinctive roles. She understood what she was doing. Having worked in the industry for years, she thought of something. What if her persona had a show of her own? She offered the idea to NBC while working at a girls' school, but she also made sure she could return to Different Strokes in the event that the spin-off didn't work out. Her career wouldn't be destroyed that way. It was a wise choice. Before Different Strokes had even completed its first season, NBC chairman Fred Silverman had decided to spin off Mrs. Garrett's character. That was unprecedented. However, Silverman broke the rules. He believed his instincts. At NBC, he was attempting to replicate the successful series he had already delivered to other networks. He knew Norman Lear enjoyed working with Charlotte Rae, and he wanted Lear to create Different Strokes. She had already made appearances in a few of Lear's other productions. She was immediately employed by Silverman to portray the housekeeper. Then he went all out. He gave Rae her own show before he even knew whether the fans genuinely adored the character. It was a component of his larger strategy to revamp NBC's programming. Major singles like Cheers, Saint It, Elsewhere and Hill Street Blues would eventually result from that approach. However, it all began with life's realities. Charlotte Rae visited the Westlake School for Girls in Bel Air in 1979 to conduct research for a spin-off of Different Strokes. She was there to learn about the atmosphere, not to scout talent. Then, however, an unforeseen event occurred. She and producer Norman Lear were given a tour of the school by 13-year-old student Mindy Cohn. Mindy had done nothing. She was only being herself. Funny, endearing, and unadulterated. That was sufficient. Her charm so captivated Rae and Lear that they invented a new character specifically for her. Mindy didn't even have to try out for the role. She was cast as Natalie Green. She appeared on a popular TV show all of a sudden, while continuing to complete her homework each night as if nothing had changed. It wasn't any different from joining the tennis team to her parents. Simultaneously, a young girl called Kim Feuds was preparing for an audition that she nearly missed. When she entered the room at the age of 9, she observed older females who appeared to belong on magazine covers. Her mother intervened as she tried to turn around and go. She ordered Kim not to allow anybody in during a pep talk in the restroom. Not even her personal anxieties stand in her way. That motivational speech was successful. Although Kim was intended to portray a 12-year-old, she ended up playing Tootie. The sole issue? She was little. The producers needed to think outside the box. They placed her on roller skates so she would appear taller than the other females. It was so successful that it became one of the most recognizable visual oddities of the program and a part of her character's personality. During that first season, Molly Ringwald was also present. She played Molly Parker, a socially conscious 11-year-old who was outspoken and carried a guitar. She was one of the show's initial 7-girl group. However, everything changed once the first season failed. Molly was judged too young for the new direction, which was to narrow the emphasis for the network. She and the majority of the original cast were fired. For her, it was a horrible experience. Being dropped was embarrassing, she later recounted, but the setback was short-lived. She became one of Hollywood's most well-known adolescent stars in a matter of years, performing at the Morning Club's 16 Candle and Lovely in Pink. The Facts of Life was in disarray when it began in 1979. Nearly no one was watching, the writing was dull, and the cast was too large. Another neglected offshoot, it appeared. NBC was prepared to shut down. One executive, however, was determined to keep it going after one season. NBC's rising talent, Brandon Tartikoff, spotted opportunity. Even though the show's creator, the great Norman Lear, had nothing to do with it, he pushed to keep it going. Lear requested that his name be removed from the credits since he felt the program was so poor. Nevertheless, he made about $30 million from it. He didn't even want the show, yet it became a treasure trove. Everything changed with that second season. What did they do first? Slice off the cast. Nearly half of the 7 girls in the original edition vanished all at once. Just a stronger emphasis on 3 females, without any significant goodbye episodes or explanation. Tootie, Blair, and Natalie. A young Molly Ringwald, who was about to become a great movie star, was one of the females that was dumped. It was dangerous. The audience seemed perplexed. Blair, who had previously denigrated the younger females, now pretended that they had been greatest friends for all time. However, the tighter cast provided the program more direction despite the uncomfortable changeover. Instead of seeming like a hodgepodge, it began to feel like a legitimate series. Then Joe arrived. Nancy McKeon appeared as Bronx tough girl Joe Polnishek, who wore a leather jacket and rode a motorbike. Grease-covered, she argued with Blair in her first scene. Everything altered because of the spark between them. Fans immediately bonded with McKeon, despite some reviewers first believing she was too rough around the edges. Joe took a look at the show. It seemed authentic because of her. Not everything was enjoyable behind the scenes. Later, McKeon acknowledged that growing up on the program was challenging. The cast was youthful, just teenagers, and often subjected to criticism over their appearance and weight. Years later, she remarked, "You're essentially filming someone's puberty." It was not always easy being in the spotlight. Additionally, the show's locales altered. It relocated from the dorm to the school cafeteria, where the girls were employed by Mrs. Garrett, who was now the dietitian for the school. The authors had more flexibility as a result. It had the feel of a workplace rather than a sleepover. Funny, strange, and even crazy things happened, as when someone stole lobster from the school kitchen. Yes, a wealthy prep school. Then, suddenly, the ratings soared. The Facts of Life moved from being NBC's lowest-rated sitcom to one of its highest-performing shows in a single year. Although a fresh time slot was helpful, the retooling was the key to success. It wasn't simply performing well by season 3, it was the top comedy on NBC. It even outperformed the original program, Different Strokes. It was the heart, not simply the gags, that held viewers' attention. This program addressed serious topics like racism, drugs, eating problems, and even suicide. It wasn't simply about school uniforms and food battles, and they weren't sugar-coated. Lisa Whelchel, who portrayed Blair, requested to be excused from one particularly daring episode involving underage sex due to her religious convictions. Despite this, NBC broadcast it with a parental warning. That week, it was still among the top 25. The theme tune even turned into a classic. Alan Thicke, Gloria Loring, and Al Burton wrote the memorable phrase, "You take the good, you take the bad." It was sung by Loring. People continued to sing along, even if it varied a little over the years. According to Thicke, creating a theme song is similar to creating a 24-second pitch for the entire production. His pitch was successful. It's difficult to comprehend how close the program was to going extinct in retrospect. However, the facts of life changed on their own with a few daring actions. A fresh cast and a new location, fresh vitality, began as a disaster and evolved into one of the 1980s longest-running sitcoms. And all it needed to get there was a little struggle and another opportunity. Behind the scenes, however, things weren't going so well. Following a summer vacation, Mindy Cohn seemed quite different on the set of The Facts of Life. She had become more energetic. Her metabolism has altered. Additionally, her physique naturally thinned down like many teens do. However, the producers asked her what occurred and drew her away rather than complimenting her on her good health. They weren't content. They advised her to put on the weight again. Mindy gasped. Natalie, the role she portrayed, was never formally referred to as the fat girl, but it seems that's how the creators perceived her. That's how they intended her to remain. Mindy's mother was not amused. She intervened and refused. She advised them to attend an actual high school to observe the appearance of females of that age. The wardrobe crew devised an alternative as Mindy refused to put the weight back. In an attempt to make her appear heavier on camera, they dressed her in baggy clothing. Nobody appeared to care how harmful it may be for a teenage girl growing up under such strain. It was all about looks. When the cameras stopped rolling, nothing improved. One of the most well-known comedians in the world at the time, Joan Rivers, started incorporating life's realities into her performances as a punchline. It was dubbed The Facts of Life by her, and the joke stuck. Word spread quickly, despite the lack of the internet at the time. The show's female cast members learned about it. They watched it on television. According to Lisa Whelchel, who portrayed Blair, they were fully aware of Joan's words. Mindy recalled how Rivers made it into a standard segment by inquiring if her audience had watched the most recent episode of The Facts of Life. The females had no choice but to endure the laughter. On set, they never discussed it. Even though they were fed up with the weight-related discussion, it persisted. A distinct form of humiliation was experienced by Lisa Whelchel. She was forced to weigh herself, sometimes in front of the producers, who had a scale on site. It became part of the everyday, she claimed. When she assumed she would get a break during the show's hiatus, they sent her to weight loss camps. They would provide her a plane ticket to a so-called fat farm, even though she would claim to be returning home to Texas. She was just 16. Her parents were divorcing each other. As her physique changed, she received ongoing criticism rather than encouragement. One day, the craft table replaced cookies and donuts with carrot and celery sticks. She claimed that although it wasn't always harsh, the implicit message that her body wasn't good enough was always present. It was more than simply physical pressure. They carried the scars for years. Nancy McKeon, who began appearing on the show at the age of 14, reflected on her experience growing up on camera. Everything, from adolescence to maturity, was documented, seen and assessed. Adolescence is one of the most vulnerable times for body image, according to psychologists, and being in the limelight exacerbates this. According to Lisa, it's a daily struggle where you can't shake the sensation that you're constantly being watched and assessed. A young person's self-perception is altered by such pressure. It puts you in a sort of cycle where you're always monitoring and fretting. You get fixated with your appearance and lose sight of who you are. When Lisa Whelchel was cast as Blair Warner on The Facts of Life, she was only a teenager. Her role soon became one of the most well-liked, and the show was a huge success. However, early in the run of the program, Lisa had to make a difficult decision behind the scenes. For Blair, the producers had a major plot in mind. She was supposed to be the first character to get unmarried, but Lisa wasn't in favor of it. Since the age of 10, she had been a Christian, and a significant aspect of her identity was her faith. She didn't hesitate when they presented the concept to her. "That's not something I can be a part of," she informed them bluntly. It went beyond personal convictions. She also felt obligated to the young audience members who admired her. She didn't believe that one episode could adequately address such a serious subject, crammed in between commercial breaks. That was not a risk she wanted to take. Her career could have suffered as a result. Many young performers wouldn't have said no to such a big plot point, especially on a program that was popular. Lisa, however, refused to back down. She was surprised that the producers accepted her choice. Later, she claimed that they always backed her convictions, something that wasn't always the case in Hollywood. The concept remained. It only remained in the background. It did not appear on the screen for 7 years. Unaltered. The authors then made the decision to revive it in the last season. However, Blair did not get the article this time. It was handed to Mindy Cohn's character, Natalie. It didn't bother Mindy the way Lisa did. She allegedly said, "Hey, I'll do it," when producers brought it up. Thus, the episode eventually aired in 1988, close to the conclusion of the show's existence. Natalie, who is now 21 years old, loses her virginity to Snake, her lover. The show presented their one-year partnership as a mature decision made by two adults in a committed relationship. It was a significant event. After avoiding discussing sex for over 10 years, the program was now doing so, having people well into their 20s as characters. That struck some as humorous. Even though the show was titled The Realities of Life, it mostly ignored one of the most important realities during its existence. Since no one had intercourse until the last season, when they were all adults, one critic jokingly said that the show didn't live up to its name. NBC did not handle the episode like a typical sitcom when it aired. They warned viewers that the content might not be appropriate for young viewers in their opening parental advice. At the time, such a warning was uncommon, particularly for a comedy. Nevertheless, the program performed well in the ratings, despite the warning at the start. That week, it placed 22nd, which was remarkable. There was a mixed response. Some commended the show's treatment of the subject. Although it wasn't hurried or cheap, some people didn't like how the other characters reacted. Some viewers thought the females humiliated and silently criticized Natalie. It caused annoyance to others. The program seemed sincere and considerate to elderly listeners. It felt outmoded and perhaps a bit preachy to younger viewers. After 2001, preparations for a reunion film began to take shape. Nancy McKeon declined to return, but the majority of the cast did. She was filming The Division, so it was officially a schedule conflict, but there was more to it. In the early discussions, she had joked that Joe should be brought back as a ghost. Somehow, that joke remained, much like in The Big Chill. Nevertheless, the film proceeded, shooting during a time when the world was changing. Production started just before September 11th, and went on throughout that terrible historical period. The females got together for Thanksgiving. According to the reunion narrative, Blair was in charge of an empire of hotels. Natalie got them all together, and Tootie, now Dorothy, was a chat show host. Her daughter showed up, but Joe did not. Surprisingly, the actors had earlier vowed not to work on a reunion movie. However, as time went on and things changed, the majority of them answered yes. The 4 original stars eventually made a comeback on film in 2019. This time, Kim Feuds produced the once-in-a-lifetime Christmas film You Light Up My Christmas. She referred to the ladies as her sisters, and ensured them participation in the selection of their character names and outfits. There were several little references to the former show's viewers throughout the film. They also named the town's ice skating rink after Charlotte Rae, who had died the previous year, as a heartfelt remembrance. Fans thought it was a very kind gesture. One even described it as enjoyable and light-hearted, giving it an almost flawless web review. In December 2021, an unexpected event occurred. In a live show broadcast by ABC, celebrities acted out scenes from classic sitcoms. The Facts of Life was one of the programs. Different Strokes was the alternative. People adored it. Millions of people watched, and it received positive reviews from reviewers. Prominent figures including Octavia Spencer, Amy Poehler, and Jennifer Aniston all declared The Facts of Life to be their favorite at a post-show discussion. Everything changed at that instant. The show's renowned producer Norman Lear was in attendance. He was in his late 90s, even for his age. He was taken aback. He had been unaware of the show's continued popularity, so he did something out of the ordinary. Mindy Cohn, Lisa Whelchel, Kim Fields and Nancy McKeon were the 4 first stars he phoned. If they were interested in reviving the show, he asked them. It was odd timing. The Globe was still coping with the epidemic in 2022. Everybody was confined to their homes. However, there was some enthusiasm about the prospect of a relaunch. The 4 women became serious in their conversation. After years apart, they reconnected, laughed and brainstormed when they reunited on Zoom. To assist develop the relaunch, they even engaged a writer. Norman Lear also participated. He exchanged ideas, took notes, and assisted in directing the process despite his advanced age. The original cast was reuniting for the first time in decades, imagining a contemporary take on their previous presentation. It was pleasant, it was authentic. Then everything broke down. After decades of closeness, the cast abruptly ceased communicating. In an interview conducted in July 2024, Mindy Cohn talked candidly about it. She said that one of the cast members had surreptitiously attempted to obtain her own spin-off, going against everyone's wishes. A 40-year friendship was shattered by the emotional upheaval that resulted from that action. Their relationship had been drama-free since the show's 1988 finale until that point, which is practically unheard of in Hollywood. However, everything changed following the betrayal. They didn't talk at all for months, and it was clumsy and superficial when they did. Douche, Cohn termed it. The way they communicated today was described as courteous, surface-level interaction rather than true camaraderie, made the pain worse. They had been collaborating closely on Zoom during the epidemic, helping to develop the rebirth. With the approval of renowned producer Norman Lear, they began formulating the plot and generating ideas. Lear even attempted to mediate the situation before his death in December 2023, but to no avail. The harm was already done. Cohn was clear by the time she gave the interview. The trust had vanished and was not returning. According to her, there was no intention to collaborate ever again. For other famous groups, that wouldn't be startling. But for this one, it was tragic. They had stood together for years, taking the all-for-one, one-for-all strategy seriously, avoided drama, adhered to choices made together, and safeguarded each other's reputations. It wasn't just personal either. For the revival, they had already engaged a writer. There were actual plans in motion. However, things fell apart when one of them decided to choose money above friendship. Cohn found it incomprehensible that someone would forfeit a shot for solo fame or such strong devoted connections. The same was true for fans. They had always cherished the fact that there was no controversy on Facts of Life. The presentation was unique in part because of its spotless picture. Then, in February 2024, an intriguing event took place. Mindy Cohn, Lisa Whelchel and Nancy McKeon all made appearances together on The Drew Barrymore Show. They handed Drew a gift bag as a surprise on her birthday. Things used to be exclusive to those on the Facts of Life set. It was a tender and sentimental moment. They honored Charlotte Rae, who portrayed Mrs. Garrett, and reminisced about the good old days. Drew even broke down in tears as she talked about how the program influenced her understanding of freedom and companionship as a child. Months later, however, people began to notice something when they watched that moment. No Kim Fields was present. People were curious about that absence. People began to wonder if she had been excluded, or if she had decided not to participate. What did that imply about the cast's existing alliances? Online detectives quickly took over. People began searching through Cohn's Instagram when she implied that followers may infer the identity of the traitor from her current acquaintances. What they discovered led to even more conjecture. Cohn didn't have any new photos of Whelchel, but he did have some with Fields and McKeon. That seems to be a significant hint. However, not everyone was in agreement. Fields' absence from the Drew Barrymore reunion was brought up by several, which might indicate that she is the most likely suspect. Others said that Cohn had often compared her character to Tootie Fields and Joe McKeon. They contended that this indicated Whelchel was the odd one out. Threads on Reddit became viral. Forum users began contrasting the show's characters with real-life actions. Some claimed that Welch's behavior made them think of Blair, ambitious, self-centered, and always seeking attention. The internet had mostly made up its mind by the end of July. There were articles that accused Welch of going behind everyone's back. In the court of popular opinion, the verdict was in, even if there was no formal confirmation. Heartbreak, bewilderment, and a fandom caught in the midst were the results of what started out as enthusiasm for a long-awaited reunion. Furthermore, it appears that the ties that formerly bound the group together have been permanently severed.